Welcome back to Seize the Gap Fantasy Football. I am Jamie G, and I'm here at Magnum to help you seize the gap and stop being so inefficient with your fantasy football leagues. It's week 14, which means it's time to get your roster ready for the playoffs. Yeah, that's right. We've got everything you need with our waiver wire recommendations and strategy for week 14.
Oh, and apparently we're so close to the playoffs. We're going to get the Jim Mora impression every week. So you've got that to look forward to, which is nice. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Seize the Gap Fantasy Football. You can find our content wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Find us on social media at Seize the Gap FF and on the web at seizethegapff.com. Nice and easy to remember, just like the flaps, FLAPS. Follow, like, and please subscribe if you had fun. Please remember to touch the thumb. And we know that everybody plays in different kinds of fantasy leagues. There's everything under the sun out there in terms of rules, settings, all that stuff. In the interest of helping as many people as we can, we're just going to be referring to ESPN fantasy football leagues when discussing ownership. And ideally, we're going to be talking about players who are owned in less than a majority of leagues, so players less than 50% owned. And unless otherwise noted, we'll generally be talking about 12-team PPR leagues.
With there only being a week or two until the playoffs officially start, you do need to be looking ahead and making moves before your opponents do just that. Mills, how the hell are we going to pull that off?
Well, first off, make the playoffs. Don't get cute with it. If you need to win this week or next week to get in, depending on your league, do everything you can, pull out all the stops, and we'll deal with the playoffs after the fact. Because if you don't get in, none of it is really worth it. Also, know the rules. Tiebreakers can matter down the stretch. There are certain things with waiver wire. Certain guys, sometimes leagues will start locking guys who are dropped. So sometimes you won't be able to pick those guys up, which can really make a difference if you're streaming players at a position. Make sure you know the rules. There's also some stuff about carrying fab over, what your position at the end of the year does for your draft pick position next year, all that kind of stuff. Those are things that you should know, always be working on here. And every player on your roster at this point should have a purpose. They should be a player you are starting currently or a player you're going to start. Absent that, they should just be the highest ceiling handcuff running back available. There's no need to carry a six wide receiver if you don't think that you're going to start him. There are a few cases where you can play defense a little bit. I think that applies more at the DST or the quarterback position. If you know someone else in your league has been streaming, or you can look at the roster and know that they're going to need to pick this guy up. If you can go ahead, beat them to it and just deny that player to them, that is a viable strategy. Don't get caught up in it. Don't go overboard with it. But if you happen to have, a roster spot to spare, or just, it never hurts to have a little bit of insurance. But again, don't worry too much about speculating here. Figure out who you're going to be starting over the next 3 to 4 weeks. Anybody else you don't need, find somebody better, find a different option, someone who gives you some upside. That's usually going to be the highest upside handcuff running back you can get. Don't worry, we'll give you a list of those in a little bit here. And ideally, just try to attack the onesie positions. Those are the positions where you're only to start one player. Most leagues, that's quarterback, tight end, kicker, and defense. Those are the easiest positions to stream, and sometimes the positions that are, outside of running back, most subject to week-to-week variations in your lineup. So go ahead and make sure you have a plan going forward. Jamie G, anything to add here? Anything in particular you do for playoff prep, or anything you found that's helped you over the years?
Yeah, I think just getting an idea of the only thing I'll add other than things you said is get an idea of some of the other folks play, other teams in your league, their lineups and how you might match up against them and utilizing that. If you know you're going to make the playoffs, you got an idea of who you might face, kind of getting an idea of who they have and how it matches up and maybe use that as a guiding light for some of the decisions you're going to make.
Yeah, the one thing you'll sometimes run into is, you'll have the great wide receivers, like you have Jamar Chase, and you're going to be playing a guy who is Joe Burrow. Unfortunately, most of the time, there's not much you can do about those scenarios of absent benching, Jamar Chase, which you're not going to do. So, but you are right, though, because some opponents, if you're a big dog to them, you're going to want to find, higher upside options, even if they don't have as much of a floor, because you don't care. It's win or go home in the playoffs. Whereas if you're playing a team that you've scored, 200 more points in this season, you might be able to get away with playing a little bit more conservatively or not have to take as many chances against them.
Well, let's kick things off here at the quarterback position. Mills, I don't know about you, but I didn't anticipate Marcus Mariota and Bryce Young turning, in top five performances here against the Broncos D and the Rams D in the same week. Somehow, though, for some reason, I just, I didn't have that one on my bingo card, Mills.
Yeah, I don't think I had that one on my Keno card either. I don't even know if I had that one on my Hallmark card, man. That was just off of the board for me. That was wild. The only good news is it was not a terrible week for injuries at the quarterback position. One main one, that's Justin Herbert, suffered a fracture for his left hand. It's his non-throwing hand. Had surgery Monday. Thinks he could play on Monday Night Football against the Eagles, but I would approach that with caution. Make sure you have another option available. That could be the case for this week and going forward. Just something to keep an eye on. Again, a quarterback broke his hand, not the easiest thing to deal with. Nobody of note at the quarterback position possibly returning this week, but we have one do it now addition. This is
Come
a player who
on,
is
do
owned
it
in more than the
now.
50% threshold of ESPN leagues, but under 80% of leagues. So out there in more leagues than you would think. In this case, that's Jaden Daniels, the Washington Commanders quarterback, not cleared for contact yet, but could play in week 14. He is owned in 71% of ESPN leagues. Two great matchups against the Giants and the Cowboys during the fantasy playoffs. And one of those guys, especially if you're going up against a team that's been struggling at the quarterback position, why give him access to Jaden Daniels? So I think go ahead, tuck him if you can, if he is out there in your league. We're getting down towards the end, kind of pencil out what your needs might be going forward, but don't be afraid to blow a decent portion of your fab on him, especially if you need a quarterback or you're trying to deny him to one of your opponents. We have one priority ad at quarterback here. I can't believe I'm saying it, but it is Jacoby Brissett of the Arizona Cardinals, owned in an even 15% of leagues, at least 18 fantasy points in every game he has started this season. He's on the buy in week 14, so if he's out there, he might be flying under the radar a little bit. That'll help you get him for a cheaper bid. He's got Houston in week 15, so you're probably not going to want to mess with that. But if you can wait past that, he gets Atlanta and Cincinnati to close out the fantasy playoffs. Two very solid matchups for the quarterback there. So I can't believe it, but you might be starting Jacoby Brissett in your fantasy championship game this season. One speculative at quarterback, that is T Law, Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars, starting to turn things around. We're seeing him get a healthier supporting cast around him, using his legs more. Solid upcoming schedule. If he plays well against Indianapolis, that'll be awesome because 50% of his remaining games in the fantasy season are against the Colts. So Trevor Lawrence only owned in 34% of leagues. A very nice speculative ad, even if you're not sure when you will use him. And then as far as streaming options in week 14, got to dig all the way down here. We have Shadur Sanders of the Browns, owned in 7% of leagues. Nice matchup against the Titans. He's pretty much got the best matchup of any of the streaming options that are likely available to you this week. And if you dig down even a little bit further, we have the former Buffalo Bill, Tyrod Taylor of the Jets, now owned in 5% of leagues. Decent matchup at home against the Dolphins. You know, Tyrod can add a little bit with his legs. Managed to get you 20 points last week in bad weather against a Falcons defense that had been at least decent at times this season. So I think he can at least find you another 15 to 20 points against the Dolphins.
We didn't have any running backs dropping 50 burgers in week 13, but we certainly had some surprises here in the top 10 performers for the week. Mills, are there any running backs coming to save us down the stretch here?
Well, I mean, I don't know about 50 burgers. Maybe we get Cheeseburger Eddie out here. I mean, he could probably, you get Terry Crews out there. I think he could cause some damage at running back. I know some guys who aren't probably going to be coming to save you, although we have to wait and see for the final injury reports. But Aaron Jones of the Vikings possibly re-aggravated his shoulder injury. Keep an eye on that. Kyron Williams of the Rams turned his ankle, did manage to return the game. Sean McVay said he looked okay on Monday. So, again, just keep an eye on him. Possible guys returning this week at running back. You have Trey Benson of the Cardinals. Fingers crossed on that one. And Omarion Hampton, rookie running back for the Chargers. Seemed like he had a shot to return last week. Kamani Vidal had himself a game, but if Hampton comes back, I expect him to jump into a fairly significant role. One do
Come
it now
on,
ad
do
at the
it
running back
now.
position. Bears rookie running back Kyle Monangai. Tough schedule down the rest of the season here, but he is in a 50-50 split with DeAndre Swift. And it seems like the Bears, if given their druthers, are going to be a run first team, or at least a very balanced team. A decent shot down the stretch to give you some value as a running back two or a flex. Seems to be the preferred option in the red zone, which is good, but Swift is the preferred option in the passing game, which is not as good. Two priority ads here. First up, we have Jordan Mason of the Vikings, fudging a little bit. He is owned in 53% of leagues, just over the threshold. This pretty much comes down to Aaron Jones. If you need help at the running back position, you can speculate on Mason. If Jones is out, he's usable. If Jones plays, you're probably not going to want to start him given what the state of the Vikings offense is right now. And then you have Saints rookie running back Devin Neal, owned in 42% of ESPN leagues. Got the start last week in place of Kamara. The production wasn't great, but I was very, very encouraged by his role. If Kamara is out once again this week against the Bucs, I think you can go back to Devin Neal here. As far as speculative ads, if Trey Benson is out, you have Zonovan Knight, Bam Knight for the Cardinals, owned in 37% of leagues. Had a pretty decent week. If DeMarcado comes back, might be trust any of the Cardinals running backs. But right now, if you have to go with one of them, Benson is out. Bam Knight's probably your guy. And then I tease the high-end handcuffs you want to own. There are a few of these guys, most notably Tyler Algier of the Falcons, owned in 33% of leagues. Bashal Tutin of the Jaguars, owned in 27% of leagues. Brian Robinson Jr. of the 49ers, owned in 21% of leagues. And Blake Corum of the Rams, owned in 13% of leagues. Should anything happen to the players ahead of them, those guys would be instant starters at the running back position. And they could also fill in as a flex in a touchdown or bust kind of desperation situation for you. But at this point of the season, all of those guys should be owned. And then you have a couple of other handcuffs that aren't quite as good, but I still have some interest in, including Tank Bigsby of my Philadelphia Eagles, owned in 20% of leagues. Dylan Sampson of the Cleveland Browns, owned in 9% of leagues. And Ray Davis of Jamie G's Buffalo Bills, owned in 5% of leagues. I reminded you what he could do when he got a chance to touch the ball against the Steelers this week. Two possible streamers for you in week 14 at the running back position. Chris Rodriguez of the Commanders has kind of taken over as the primary back there. RIP to our guy Bill. I guess we'll see you next year. He's only owned in 12% of leagues, gets a matchup against the Vikings. Not the greatest matchup, but again, if you're digging deep, it's happy to find anybody you could start at the running back position on the waiver wire. And then finally, Keaton Mitchell of the Baltimore Ravens, only owned in 2% of leagues. Justice Hill just hit the IR. The Ravens desperately need some juice into that offense. We saw Mitchell find the end zone last week. Could be involved to the tune of 4 or 5 carries, 4 to 5 targets. If you're in a PPR league, you're desperate at the running back position, you could certainly do worse in week 14.
Week 13 was most definitely a mixed bag at the wide receiver position. Some of the usual suspects had those monster games. We got a couple of big, big performances from out of nowhere, but we also had some major disappointments. Starting early, Mills, on Thanksgiving Day.
Yeah, if you own Amon Ross St. Brown, it was just unfortunate for you, be it, in your season long league, your dynasty league, in your DraftKings lineup, whether you had a wager on him, whatever, one target, got his ankle rolled up on. The good news is it does not sound like a high ankle sprain. The bad news is he's probably going to miss at least 1 week, maybe two. That is the hope. If you own Jameson Williams, plug and play. Otherwise, you're going to have to get creative. Also saw Marvin Harrison Jr. pick up a new injury, just missed 2 weeks with the appendectomy. Now he's got a heel, so consider him questionable for week 14. And Parker Washington of the Jaguars picked up a hip injury, also questionable for week 14. A couple of receivers who could be returning include Jaden Reed of the Packers, T. Higgins of the Bengals, and Drake London of the Falcons. Feel decent about Reed and Higgins, not terribly optimistic about London's chances at this point. We do have a few do it now ads here. Again, players owned in more than 50%, but less than 80% of ESPN leagues. Up top, we have Jacoby Myers of the Jacksonville Jaguars, owned in 71% of leagues, at least 11 PPR points in his last 3 games, and he's increased his production every single game with the Jaguars. Looks like a good fit. Might worry that he's not going to quite get the target volume, but right now I don't see any reason not to be starting Myers. Then you have Chris Godwin Jr. of the Bucs, owned in 59% of leagues. Finally looks like he's starting to get healthy. Featured a lot more last week, and Tampa Bay has one of the best remaining schedules for fantasy wide receivers. Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts has kind of taken over as their wide receiver one, owned in 54% of leagues, so out there in 46% of leagues, had at least 14 PPR points in 4 of his last 6 games. A little bit of a bob, a little bit of a boomer bust nature to his profile, but he has boomed far more than he's been busting this season. And then Christian Watson, similar profile for the Green Bay Packers, owned in 52% of leagues. Higher end Bob prospect, at least 9.9 fantasy points in each of his last 3 games in a PPR league. He is the guy usually if they're taking deep shots down the field they're looking for. So could have a little low floor, but also has a pretty good ceiling to go with it. And then we have just a whole bunch of speculative ads at wide receiver. Again, you don't want to be wasting too many bench spots on wide receivers at this point. But if you're looking for a guy you might need to start in the short term or something like that, don't mind taking a chance on these guys. We have Jaden Reed of the Packers, owned in 40% of leagues. Jaden Higgins of the Texans, owned in 36% of leagues. It's not going to be all Jaden's, I promise you. Kayshon Boutte of the New England Patriots, owned in 31% of leagues. Luther Burden III of the Bears, owned in 8% of leagues. Jalen Coker of the Panthers, owned owned in 3% of leagues. Last week's darling, Adonai Mitchell of the Jets, owned in 3% of leagues. Pat Bryant, the rookie wide receiver for the Broncos, owned in 1% of leagues. Isaac Tesla, rookie wide receiver for the Lions, also owned in 1%, as is Dontavian Wicks, another guy lit it up last week with 2 touchdowns for the Packers. And then finally, Devon Vele of the New Orleans Saints, only owned in 1% of leagues. Again, don't worry too much about carrying these guys, but all of them have a little bit of utility. If you need to pick somebody up, plug them in for you this week.
In week 13, the young guns edged out the old heads at the tight end position. But if you started Zach Ertz, you probably aren't complaining about 20 points against the Broncos defense. But do we have any major injuries here at tight end to complain about?
For once, Jamie G, I'm pleased to report no new additions to the injury list here, and hopefully your guy Dalton Kincaid can return in week 14. That would be nice. It sounded like he was at least closer to returning than he had been the previous week here, so hoping he will be available to us again before the fantasy playoffs start. For do it now ads at the tight end position. Can't believe some of these guys are still available in the number of leagues they are. Up top, we have Old Man Ertz. Zach Ertz only owned in 55% of leagues. Theo Johnson, second year tight end for the Giants, owned in 54% of leagues. Dalton Schultz, who's just been a high floor PPR machine for the Texans, owned in 52% of leagues. And rookie tight end for the Browns, Harold Fannin Jr., owned in 51% of leagues. Seemingly climbed very much ahead of David Njoku in terms of the pecking order at tight end for the Browns. 3 priority ads here. Again, these are almost in the same group ahead of them with the do it now guys, but they are owned and under the threshold. Definitely excited about all 3 of these guys. We have Brenton Strange, tight end for the Jaguars, owned in 22% of leagues. Darren Waller, old man Waller for the Dolphins, owned in 20% of leagues. And Isaiah Likely finally had the big breakout game we were waiting for on Thanksgiving for the Ravens, only owned in 8% of leagues. If you're speculating at tight end, I still don't mind tucking Colston Loveland, owned in 36% of leagues. Probably going to take another Cole Kmet injury to make it happen, but if Kmet was injured, I think Loveland would probably make my top 10 tight end options for the week. AJ Barner of the Seahawks has had a couple of decent ceiling games, only owned in 14% of leagues. Again, I'm not going out of my way to stack a lot of tight ends up, but if you were doing it by committee here, and it looks like Barner has a couple of matchups that could work for you, you could do worse. And then Gunnar Helm, rookie tight end for the Titans, owned in 0% of leagues. It's like 0.4, but we're rounding down here. Led the Titans with 7 targets. Has a chance to be a decent streaming option for you if you're desperate to tight end down the stretch. And as far as streaming options for week 14 at tight end, I already mentioned Brenton Strange, owned in 22% of the leagues. Nice matchup against the Colts. So if you pick him up, you can immediately plug him in. Mason Taylor of the New York Jets, only owned in 13% of leagues, gets a nice matchup against the Dolphins. And then Isaiah Likely of the Ravens, again, only owned in 8% of leagues, gets a matchup against the Steelers team that one of the easiest ways to attack has been at the tight end position. So 3 streamers for you, keeping it strange with Brenton Strange, Mason Taylor, and Isaiah Likely.
Are you in there, baby? You in there? Yeah. Starting defense. Place at the table.
We also know that offense rules everything around us when it comes to fantasy football, but we do feel that the defense and special teams units deserve a place at the table. Mills, who are the top defense special team streaming options for week 14?
I will cheat a little bit and first go with my Philadelphia Eagles, slightly over the threshold, only 54% of leagues. This is contingent on Justin Herbert not starting. If Trey Lance is out there for the Chargers, I'm willing to take a chance on the Eagles defense against them, and then dip down to teams that should be available for you. We have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, only owned in 23% of leagues, getting a matchup at home against the New Orleans Saints. The New York Jets, we're deep diving here, Jamie G. New York Jets owned in 9% of leagues, gets a matchup at home in New Jersey against the Dolphins. It's that time of year. It's cold. It's windy. Not the optimal conditions for Tua Tagovailoa. I can see the Jets managing some sacks, generating some turnovers here. And then we get the Washington Commanders. They get the matchup. They're only owned in 3% of leagues, and they're playing the Vikings. Maybe the Vikings bounce back a little bit here. JJ McCarthy theoretically is supposed to play, but given the performance that the Commanders put on against the Broncos, I really don't mind taking a chance starting them against, be it Max Browser or JJ McCarthy. Either way, I think you're feeling pretty decent about your chances with the Commanders. So there you go, some streaming DST options. The Philadelphia Eagles, if Justin Herbert is out, against the Chargers. Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the Saints. New York Jets against the Dolphins. And the Washington Commanders against the Vikings. It's getting tough, Jamie G. People are starting to carry two defenses, so you're going to see the streaming options kind of dwindling as we go forward. So, make sure you got a plan at the position going forward because they deserve a place at the table.
Yes, they do. And you deserve a big round of applause for checking out another episode here at Seize the Gap Fantasy Football. We appreciate you riding with us week in and week out. If you haven't done so yet, go ahead and like and subscribe. Mills will let you know where you can find all of our details, and we'll see you next week right here on Seize the Gap Fantasy Football.
Thanks again for checking out the show. You can find Seize the Gap wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Find us on social media at Seize the Gap FF and on the web at seizethegapff.com. Very simple, very easy to remember, just like those flaps, FLAPS. Follow, like, and please subscribe. If you had fun, please remember to touch that thumb. I'm Magnum Mills with Jamie G. Thanks again for checking out the show, and remember to seize the gap so you can stop being so inefficient.
And we don't care if you're old, you need to seize the gap.